started.
Right, good morning and welcome to the Executive Member for Economy and Strategic Planning meeting. I am joined today by Councillor Craghill because the first item of discussion is covering both of our portfolios. So just to run through the initial agenda, so item 1, declarations of interest. I don't have anything that isn't already included on the register of interest.
And I don't have anything.
Right, okay, minutes. Minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of October 2021. I'm happy to sign those. Thank you. Public participation. I don't believe we have any members of the public or councillors registered to speak. So that then brings us on to item 4, review of formal enforcement action and enforcement policy.
Yeah, thank you, councillors. I'll lead this one.
Who you are?
Yeah, I'm Matt Boxall, Head of Public Protection at here at the City of York Council, and I've got with me my colleagues Jay Mertz, Head of Community Safety, and Ruth Abbott, who's Housing Standards and Adaptions Manager, and they're going to talk about their the work of their teams in a few moments. So, as you should have seen in the report, it's our annual review of enforcement activity taken under the council's enforcement policy. There's a couple of things to note. First of all, action this year in terms of prosecutions, etc., a little bit more limited because officers were deployed to deal with the COVID pandemic. First of all, ensuring lockdowns, etc., were taking place, and then the recovery thereafter. And secondly, the Crown Prosecution Service guidance, we're also asking prosecutors to take an alternative route to prosecution wherever possible in order to try and limit the burden on the courts. So there's a little bit less court activity in the courts than you'd normally see. That said, there still is a fair amount there, but you'll notice that a lot of the action has been alternative action, particularly around fixed penalty notices in relation to COVID breaches, for example, in the public protection arena. So, as I say, colleagues can go into a bit more detail about the work in their areas in a moment. The other thing the report is asking you to approve is a consultation over the coming year, basically to relook at the enforcement policy. It's been a while since I had a complete refresh, relook. So I think it's probably time to begin that process again. So a consultation with the public and businesses would be the starting point. So we're asking for your go ahead to begin that process, and not only to look at the areas that we might prioritise, but also perhaps even how we do enforcement, drawing on some of the good practice that we've picked up from the use of the COVID marshals in particular, and the way that they managed to bring about change and compliance without necessarily a formal enforcement route. But that would all be picked up obviously in the course of the consultation and the work that we do to bring back a review next year.
Okay. James, you want to?
Yes.
And then we'll come to Ruth.
So in relation to community safety enforcement then, my function is mainly around the neighbourhood enforcement team. We cover 3 geographic patches covering environmental crime, low-level antisocial behaviour, domestic noise, nuisance, fly tipping, fly posting, dog fouling, all of those issues. And then also in relation to the city centre, issues such as nuisance begging, selling or busking and street urination. And the team also run the domestic noise patrol service 9 PM to 3 AM Friday and Saturday. I think it's probably fair to say that within the community safety world, enforcement is very much seen as the last approach. We would always try to change behaviour first. So enforcement isn't something that we would go in as an intention to use immediately. It would always be following lots of work designed to change behaviour first. We have, over the last 12 months, has been a strange year for the team. We've had quite a lot of abstractions, particularly during COVID with staff illness. One member of the team with long COVID, so we've been very short-staffed. We've also had an unprecedented number of calls around noise nuisance this year, which has been, you know, completely unusual. So the team has been very, very stretched in terms of the resource that we have available to us, and obviously fulfilling the noise patrol service at the weekend abstracts staff during the week, which further stretches the resourcing issue again.
Okay.
Okay, my team at the Housing Standards and Adaptation Service, I've got to say this last year probably has proven the fact that how important housing has been in the world for people experienced during the pandemic. It's been that kind of refuge, being their place of work and then, as well as their home. The team do a range of kind of activities. Proactively, we have the licensing scheme for houses in multiple occupation, and then we also deal with complaints from tenants reactively, and we had a number of kind of complaints from tenants, but we had to, during the pandemic, treat those in a different way. So we had a different approach to helping and supporting tenants, and also a different approach to helping and supporting landlords in terms of giving them extra time to deal with complaints and also deal with tenants who were obviously very mindful of allowing anybody into their homes. So it's that balancing act that we had to take during the pandemic. Also, I would say during that year, we were very successful in that we actually got a number of bids, successful funding bids from the government, which enabled us to do a couple of things. In particular, one was around, we got some funding from BEIS, which I always forget the government name, Energy, Industry and Strategy, I think it is, business, it's a good title. And they gave us £100,000 for us to actually do some pilot work around some regulations called the Minimum Energy Efficiency Standards. So we were able to pilot a toolkit that the government had developed, and we did a number of actions as a result of that were reported to Councillor Craghill's session in August. I've said July, but it was actually the August session, I remember. And then we also got some government money from what was then the Ministry of Housing and Community Development Government, and they gave us £162,000 worth of funding, which enabled us to actually, during the pandemic, to train over 128 enforcement officers across the region, or obtain funding to enable 128 enforcement officers to be trained across the region from 21 local authorities. And we had anticipated that doing in-person training, but we were able to actually facilitate that through online training. So we still managed to do that piece of work. And going forwards, I suppose, just to sort of say is that we've got priorities next year. We've got out for consultation at the moment, the case to see whether we've got a case for additional licensing. We have been successful in obtaining another round of funding from BEIS for further work, and are leading on a regional approach to do with the minimum energy efficiency standards. So we're working with 8 other local authorities. And then there's a couple of sort of minor areas of work. Is we are looking at electrical safety standards that were just introduced last year, and a very small piece of area, but it's interesting, about looking at whether people who operate residential mobile homes, whether those people are fit and proper people to run those as well. So it only affects 4 sites in York, where it's a new piece of legislation we've been asked to enforce.
Okay. Thank you. Questions for officers?
Yes, thank you. I suppose it's a general question which maybe relates to the proposal to review the policy, which I think is a good idea. It's time to have a look at that. When we look through the report, we see the numbers of enforcement actions that have been taken. Obviously, we know it's been COVID as well, has had an impact. But I think it's really interesting to see that against the, you know, the number of either complaints or incidences there have been, and maybe in future we might see that comparison more so we can measure impact. Because obviously, as I think you've all touched on, a lot of the impact is in the prevention. It's not just the number of things that are actually enforced on. But I just wonder if, you know, maybe going forward we can pull that out even more. So
yeah, I think that would be certainly an interesting piece of work. I know Jane probably talk about the crime levels in the city, overall crime levels and that kind of thing. But certainly we could look at the impact of our work. I mean, we do it a little bit around anti-idling enforcement, where we talk about the number of hours of idling saved rather than the number of people spoken to. But there's the opportunity definitely to tease out, I think, some more of those impact measures rather than a straight count of enforcement actions, as it were. I don't know, Jane, if you want to talk about the safety.
Yeah, it's certainly something that we would be able to do from our case management system, to pull out the volume of complaints compared to the number of prosecutions as a result. And I think as well, it would probably need some contextualisation as well, which outlines the preventative work that has gone on to stop those things from escalating to a prosecution level.
Absolutely.
I think one of the important things is to highlight that enforcement action is not necessarily a success, is it? You don't want it to. You don't want matters to result to enforcement, do you?
It's having that potential to enforce is very effective, but it's a lot of the prevention work that you do that actually makes a big impact.
And actually, like I say, I think Letitia will list out in the consultation.
I was just going to ask Jane, some of these figures, if people look through your actual in the appendix, in the annex, you have a list of figures, and I think some people might ask about there's some like litter is obviously, you've had COVID as well, as you mentioned, but some of them are quite low, like litter and dog fouling. And I just wondered if you could explain what the challenges are of actually doing some of those things.
Yes, so with tackling litter and dog fouling, it's probably, they are the two areas where it is really, really difficult to actually catch the person in the act. So for us to be able to take enforcement action, we have to actually see the act being committed. So in relation to littering, that would have to be the person actually dropping the litter in the first instance and then walking away and leaving it. Because my officers are a uniformed team, quite often when they're out and about, people don't tend to do things when they see them. So it does, they act as a bit of a deterrent in that respect. And also getting the intelligence and information that gives us sufficient detail to be able to deploy resources effectively is quite difficult. So in relation to dog fouling, getting that information about the times that incidents are taking place, potentially people who, the dog walking community is very, very good often at identifying who the perpetrators are, providing that sort of information so that we've got that level of information that will enable us to target some patrols at specific times when things are happening. Because otherwise we can spend a disproportionate amount of time. I've already talked about the stretch on resources that we've got with the volume of noise complaints alone. To be putting people out simply to be doing litter patrols is very, very resource intensive for not a lot of gain in terms of being able to take action. So having that targeted information and getting that level coming in with reports where members of the public have got concerns does really, really help us to do a little bit more targeted work.
So you do welcome those reports?
Absolutely, 100%, yes.
And my last one was just going back to the review of the policy. We talked a little bit when we were talking about some of this earlier on about the scope of the enforcement and whether there was any potential. I think it's quite difficult for the public to understand things like parking enforcement and planning enforcement are separate. But there's one particular aspect of planning enforcement that is causing quite a lot of issues, which is construction sites. And that often overlaps with public protection in some respects, but even transport highways issues. And I just wondered if you think in the course of doing this review, there's a potential to consider how we might be more reactive on construction sites, because it is quite an issue for the public. Is that something we might consider how we could look at in the course of the policy?
I think so. I think in the review, everything needs to be looked at for gambit. So and then we choose what's in and what's out from there. So absolutely. I think that's something we
have to look at the practicalities, but I think it would be good if we could consider it. Yes.
Right. Okay. Well, if I just pick up on that last point, I think I spent a considerable amount of time during lockdown dealing with the council as a developer of the Lowfield site. There has been a significant reduction in complaints. The site manager changed, and that has made a considerable difference. But there was an element of frustration from residents, and therefore I think as part of that we do need to look at all development, because there are levels of noise disruption that is inherent with this activity, but there are reasonable steps that can be taken, and showing the public that steps are being taken, or what is I think we had a meeting in relation to a development in the city centre, and it was understanding what can be enforced and what actually is not within the remit of the authority to do. I think that explaining that is part of the problem. Otherwise, ward councillors, all 47 of us, end up in receipt of some exasperated phone calls, shall we say. And because we're accessible out of hours during the weekend, we do get a fair number of complaints. But so that if we can wrap that into the review, just going through the report, I think your initial comments, Matt, were very pertinent. In the pandemic has been a very difficult situation in which to work. Staff are no less prone to contracting COVID than any other members of the public, and that sometimes has been lost. So I think it's worth acknowledging that, and I appreciate some of the enforcement action did itself result in a number of members of staff contracting COVID or having to isolate. So because of the nature of the business, there's actually been greater exposure. And equally, as Ruth, you said, that because everyone was at home, there was more awareness of the local environment. People walked into nearby places that they probably hadn't been to for years, and then thought, well, I really like this, and I would like it to remain tidy. So we had a long period where everything remained quite tidy, and then society was released and some old habits were restored. So I think it's worth trying to use this as a reset, that the review of the policy is about, yes, trying to educate, to try and head off the problem, as Jane alluded to, that community safety should be seen as the last resort, and changing behaviour first. And if we can include in the consultation demonstrations of where the council is doing that education policy remember some great assemblies at schools where I'm governor, where the street environment officers came in and said, you know, litter is a problem. Most young people actually complain about litter, and their frustration, and you know, very conscious of plastic in the environment. So it's an element of society that we need to push against, but demonstrate that we're doing our bit. And I think part of the statistics is have 689 noise warning letters. So that's quite exceptional. I've been watching these figures for many years, and that does stand out. And probably a result of people being stuck at home, and therefore things that might they could have moved away from for a few hours, they were not in a position to. I think with the litter and dog fouling, that's something that people feel very strongly about, and therefore demonstrating that we're doing what we can as an authority, and if we can get the message out about, well, it's uniformed people who then have to witness it, and therefore people tend to behave themselves when they see somebody in the vicinity which is in uniform. It's more difficult. But if there's ways in which, yes, if you're willing to provide information or you know, provide evidence, then that can be used. But it's all part of the process of showing that we're doing our bit, so that people feel, well, yes, the council is doing what it can. I will volunteer as a litter picker, because there were lots of people who did volunteer during lockdown to do that. And I think it's about a positive step. So there's communication through all of the notice boards in the city that we can either directly run or provide posters for. I hope that in the consultation that there's ways of communicating with the business improvement district, with parish councils, the town council, residents associations, the retail forum, the various traders associations, and schools, so that there's and the individual ward teams. I think it's important that, you know, we all, it's something that all 47 councils get, is complaints about you know, this sort of activity. But I think the key point in the business section was creating a level playing field, that some of the enforcement action is entirely necessary, because if somebody's trying to get away with putting the public at risk or cutting corners that reputable companies don't do, then, you know, there has to be, at the end of the day, an action taken. And I appreciate the amount of time and effort that goes into the cases for national trading standards, that's regional investigation and e-crime, because they consume a huge amount of time for individual cases. So, Jen, I just wanted to ask specifically about mobile CCTV, because that is an outward manifestation of the council proactively tackling flighting. Would you like to explain what's been going on?
Yes, so we have got mobile CCTV, which is specifically for fly tipping offences. We originally had to put the training of staff back due to COVID and then staff absence. And because we do need 2 officers to deploy those cameras, that's proved challenging with the volume of work that teams had on. My community safety manager has got a meeting to identify hotspots in line with the Surveillance Commissioner's Code of Practice, beginning of next month, and we will be looking at the locations where cameras will be deployed and developing a calendar of deployments. So we will really start to see the use of that increase significantly from what we've seen this year.
thanks for that. I think that's important. I know within my ward we have a number of hotspots,
Yes.
and we've put up some signs, and I'm sure that Councillor Crackle being the city centre councillor, you can nominate a few hotspots.
Yes.
But I think it's important as part of the communication with the public to say we can't be everywhere at every time, but we are actively doing this, and where there are successful prosecutions, that is advertised, so that then becomes people might modify their behaviour if they think that they have a strong chance of being caught and fined significant sums of money, because all of this costs the council money to clear up. And I'm grateful for the amount of time that officers have put into recent spate of fly tipping on Askham Lane just before the outer ring road, which seems to be a very new development there and regrettable. So I think that covers all the points I was going to raise. Did you have any?
Well, I would just like to say, because I focused on questions before, just to really welcome all the work that's being done by the different teams, and how effective it has been really, you know, through COVID and working with all those COVID challenges. And I think the report demonstrates, you know, that because we will enforce, there is a process, and we go through a process, and it includes prevention, but at the end of it, we will enforce. And I know I've signed off a number of press releases, and you know, that have demonstrated where we have actually enforced recently and got to that end point. You know, it shows that we're serious about that, but that we're also doing huge amounts of prevention. And, you know, in Ruth's area, we're improving the condition of buildings, and fire safety, damp and mold, all those things being tackled. I think there's been a tremendous amount of really positive work that has been done.
Okay, thank you. Right, so I think in addition to noting the report, I think from the discussion that we've had with Councillor Crackhill and myself, I think if we just add some additional recommendations, that we would thank officers for the work that they have done during a difficult time during the pandemic and lockdowns, where guidance from the government was rapidly changing whilst implementing enforcement and giving advice to business and residents. To note the additional workload in some areas compared to previous years. We request that you consult with all councillors and the public on policies to update the council's enforcement policy and reporting back of steps taken to enforce, as well as promoting activities which will encourage positive behaviour. So to work with the Police and Safe York Partnership to develop a holistic approach involving the communities team, ward teams, not all 47 councillors, Business Improvement District, Retail Forum, Traders Associations, Parish Council and Town Council, Residents Association, schools and other bodies, to ensure a citywide approach to show the collective work of statutory officers and partners to tackling enforcement issues, but clearly performance reporting of the distinct work of the council's enforcement teams. Just separately say that is, we need to show we're doing our bit and encourage everybody else to play their part. Develop a communications plan which reminds residents of the work that is done by the team and how to contact them or request help or provide information which can assist with enforcement, and to report on the outcome of mobile CCTV camera use to tackle fly tipping. So with those additional recommendations.
Can we add in investigating the potential for the construction sites?
Yeah, certainly. I'm looking at all construction sites. Investigation, and that would require work with the planning enforcement team and developing that as part of the policy. So with that additional point. Okay,
I want to add to the list of consultees for the policy review, landlord associations as well.
yes. Landlord associations, so we'll just add that to the list. Fourth bullet point. Okay. Right.
Thank you,
Thanks
councillors.
very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I'll leave you to your next
Right.
item.
Give people time to rearrange. Signs that relate to the people directly. Right. Item 5, review of the City of York Council's one-year business support strategy.
Thank you, Councillor Waller.
Can I
Yes.
just put this in the context of this being a part of the broader one-year COVID recovery strategy that the executive agreed in 2021. We've reported back through executive on some of the other non-business related activities in that work. But Alex is now going to just walk you through the particular strand of that strategy which related to business support.
Yeah, thank you.
Right. Thank you, Tracy.
So, Alex Dockery, Economic Growth Manager. So, the report in front of you, Councillor, provides an overview of the Council's support for businesses during the pandemic. And as Tracy's mentioned, particular aspects of that have already been well versed and well reported, such as the quick and efficient delivery of government funding, and also our microgrants work as well, which supported businesses who are beyond the scope of government support. And an independent review highlighted the benefits of that approach and how many businesses we've been able to support in York through that decision made by executive to make sure that no one fell through the cracks. But this report here focuses on the one-year business support strategy, as Tracy's already mentioned, that formed part of the Council's one-year recovery and renewal plan, a plan that sought to address the very significant and immediate aspects of the pandemic across all aspects of life in York. So just to kind of recap the kind of main strands of that business support strategy, it comprises of 4 key themes. The first was network, so making sure that we're strengthening links with public and private sector business support providers, but also making sure that we supported businesses to understand what support was available, very important in such a challenging time. The second strand was around targeted support, so how we lobbied the LEP and government for further targeted support. I know, Councillor, you wrote a number of letters to various ministers highlighting the plight of businesses at the time. And these letters were informed by genuine business need that we gathered through sector roundtables and other engagement approach that we led as well. The third strand was sector development, so how we work with our established list of key sectors to formulate and implement sector-specific plans, and that also informed some of the work that we did around our city centre, making sure it was able to encourage people back to the city centre in a safe manner, but also providing spaces for businesses to trade beyond their footprint. And then finally, workforce skills and training, so helping both individuals at risk of redundancy and businesses needing to flex and adapt to take advantage of the help on offer. So the report basically, a detailed review of the business support strategy is contained within the annex of the report. In the report, I pulled out some key initiatives that we've been able to implement. And just to kind of provide a few of these for context, the allocation of £500,000 from the council's additional restrictions grant funding to develop an innovative business support voucher scheme, which is now open for applications, and actually having quite a healthy uptake as well from both suppliers registered to provide their services, but also applicants to apply for support. Over 600 free FSB memberships provided to local businesses to access a wide range of support and advice at the time, support that we recognise the council itself can provides, but that was available from partners. 2 new business startup programmes launched by York and North Yorkshire Growth Hub to support new and prospective entrepreneurs to develop their business propositions. That was also joined in addition with a new B2C support offer from the LEP as well, providing support to many businesses that we knew previously had missed out from support from Leeds City Region LEP, given their targeted focus on sectors. The pop-up space initiative on College Green in partnership with York Bid, that's again bringing to the fore the work that we've done in partnership to support businesses to trade beyond their premises, recognising that some of the spaces in York are very constrained by their size, and so for the social distancing, businesses did struggle to actually have trade through their doors. So these are just a selection of various things that we've been able to do during the pandemic, and have been kind of highlighted in the business support strategy. Our forthcoming economic strategy will build on this economic response work, and it will continue the focus on business support, as we know how important it is to the development of our economy, and making sure that we enable businesses in our city to not only prosper, but to also thrive as well. The report also highlights the important role that economic development does play in driving economic growth, supporting good quality employment, and also facilitating an improvement in residents' quality of life. And whilst the work of our team, the economic growth team in the council, often falls under the radar, the team does play a key role in enabling and sustaining employment in the city, and also contributing to a successful local economy. And I've put in the report the range of benefits that we provide, including job creation, supporting industry development, what we do to retain businesses in the city, but also helping to expand, increased business rates take for the council, which then allows for improved services and investment in capital projects, and also that improved quality of life of residents that comes with better quality jobs and good jobs being provided in the city. And just to kind of show some of this work in action, then, from a business support point of view, you know, our approach is there's no wrong door approach. So we're keen to support any business that comes to the council for support. In addition to that, we have 2 growth managers funded from Leeds City Region LEP, and they support businesses with growth ambitions to receive support from the public sector. So since the beginning of 2021, our growth managers have supported 287 businesses in York, with several being able to access grants to propel their business forward. And in the report, to highlight a number of cases where that's happened. And we also promote York as a place to do business as well. So during the same time period, we've handled 97 inquiries from businesses and investors seeking to create jobs in York. Half of these are still live, but a number of them have resulted in successful landings within the city, again, supporting job creation and a thriving economy. And again, our economic strategy will continue that kind of focus on job creation. But there's also needs to be a focus on making sure we have the right provision of workspace in the city for businesses to grow, and also to attract new businesses as well. And that will be, again, a major focus of our forthcoming new economic strategy. But also, I mean, so obviously, good work already happening. You know, Hudson Court is completed. The Guildhall will be coming on stream in the new year. Obviously, York Central development work starting on site into the site clearance. So we know that the city will be a focal point for good quality employment moving forwards. And from our teams, how we encourage, enable, and harness that for the benefit of York's businesses and residents. So thank you for hearing the report today.
Thank you. Just going through this, and as with the previous item, noting that officers have worked during quite extraordinary circumstances, and supporting businesses when they really did need that help, and awareness that the council was listening to them, and grateful for the support that officers provided for the lobbying work that we did to draw attention to those businesses that were missing out on the initial grants, and also throughout the process, the skills work that was done to connect central government announcements of pots of money and linking that to what was going on the ground. I think that grounded reality has been the strength of the response in York, and I'm grateful for the work that the team has done in numerous meetings and discussions to gather that information and to collate it in a format that's been useful to apply. And on paragraph 7, there's been channeling funds as quickly as possible to over 3,500 businesses. Well, there are 7,000 in total, so that is a significant figure, and contributed to the ARG grants being entirely distributed, and therefore the final 1.4 million came because we had ensured the appropriate allocation to those businesses that needed it, the previous amounts of money. I think what would be, it's been helpful to have throughout the report specific figures on numbers of businesses helped. So paragraph 13, the business growth managers have supported 287 businesses, and the economic growth team has handled 97 inquiries from businesses and investors seeking to create jobs in York. That's an important metric that I would want to see going forward, that there has been a tremendous effort put into outcomes, but at the end of the day, it's the number of jobs and the quality of the jobs in the city that is the measure of success. And there are a number of references to national comparator data, which shows that York has had a strong response to the recovery, and we need to keep that up and to look at those schemes that have worked very well. I think the micro business scheme, where there was full analysis of a large number, and it was demonstrable that 300 businesses were saved that might otherwise have gone under, and you know, those people are still an active part of the economy. So I think with the Annex 1, I think in future reports, if we can have a greater application of measurements of what the interventions that you mentioned, what they've actually delivered on the ground. And so it'd be very interesting to see a measurement of the outcome of the business support voucher. Yes, it is not easy to keep tabs on how businesses change and pivot and utilise that information. But I think there's, as you described, Alex, the initial phase was to passport the government cash for the immediate day-to-day survival. Then it was providing advice, accepting that we had a small team. We've now recombined the economic development team from Make It York, but even that is a finite resource. Supporting from the Make a Business Grant membership of FSB, so that there was another pool of advice, but even that has a finite capacity, and therefore this latest round about supporting a voucher scheme for networking is a next phase, a natural progression for businesses to get more specialist advice. And it's encouraging the number of contacts that are coming through as York established its strengths, and certainly in heritage, in rail tech, as well as in care. Those are the areas where there's been significant development in recent weeks. draw attention to one of the later bits of the annex, which were comments on the work in conjunction with the labs to promote businesses to reduce their environmental impact and supporting the city's climate ambitions. There's been a number of reports, including one by the Local Government Association, on the potential for green jobs. There has been significant work during the pandemic to provide the infrastructure for training, for electric vehicle charging, maintenance at York College, which was accelerated by the government's Build Back Better scheme. And equally, there was a project at Aston Bright College on the similar vein. So I think it's now important that we populate those areas where it is achievable for York to get its share of those green jobs. I think the point's been made that actually all jobs will be green or contain an element of it, but it's how we demonstrate we're getting our allocation and that we're not losing out to other areas that have got ahead of the curve.
There's many aspects of that green jobs piece that we need to make better links. We've got our carbon zero strategies being in development. We're linking those in with our skills and economic strategy to make sure those things are really well understood. And I think you touched on it there, that what is a green job? Many jobs that exist at the moment that are fossil fuel based will be green over the coming years, and it's making sure that we're developing those transitions in existing sectors. But we're also noticing the absolute dearth in the supply chain of the right skills, particularly around construction and retrofitting, where we need to be. We're at the leading edge of the development of some of those concepts and in application, particularly around retrofitting and passive house construction. We also need to be at the leading edge of developing the skills to be able to facilitate that, because what we're experiencing is a lack of defined supply chain, a lack of response from the sector, and a lack of skills to be able to, even at the level that we're doing, to be able to take that work. So definitely need to have a much more focused view of what that means and what we're going to do to promote it.
I guess for me as well, I mean, again, I support what Tracy says, but I think that supply chain piece is really important, and we know that we've got a pipeline of work in York that needs doing, and we would like York companies to be able to do that. But equally, if we become an early adopter of this new technology, these new ways of working in York, those businesses providing those services can actually work further afield to do those services for other places who haven't actually caught up to us. So actually, there's a big business development piece here, big economic opportunity here. But if we get it right with our supply chain, we'll actually accelerate the growth of York businesses as well. Again, stimulating local economic activity.
I think what Alex has presented in this report is the fact that a moment in time, the transition, which, as you pointed out in your comments, the transition between that immediate response to the manifold impact of COVID for businesses to be able to survive the first wave. What we've got now is a world that's slightly recast, and many businesses looking to understand how they're going to either pivot their business model and adapt to different customer behaviours or different supply chain variables. And I think that voucher scheme comes at the right time. It probably perhaps would have been a bit too early for businesses to understand exactly what they needed advice to do on that specialist front. But as we now look towards our developing economic strategy, it's about what does the next bit of recovery look like, and that's got to be more hardwired. It's got to be a bigger review of our sector development, and particularly around that skills piece to assist. So I think the report is timely in that it helps us to think through how we're going to construct those real interventions that we need to make to support on either business development in a post-COVID, post-Brexit world where things have changed quite a bit, but also in the on that kind of carbon zero journey. How do we lodge ourselves so that we're positioned where we want to be?
Right, thanks for that. So I think we've talked this through. I'm happy to note the content of the report. I think I'd add my thanks to officers for working through difficult times, and then request a detailed response on the potential to create green jobs through the support of the city's climate ambitions as an additional element. Right, okay, that brings item 5 to close. Item 6 is urgent business. I don't have any urgent business. Therefore, I bring the meeting to a close. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.